English translation 875th contact. Sunday 7th of January 2024, 1:24 HRs.
Salome, welcome, Apta. Actually, I was expecting Quetzal, because you said he would be back in a few days.
That is true, but he is still absent for another 2 or 3 days. But greetings, and thank you for your welcome.
And what is with Bramunda, Florina, and Injana?
They will not be back here for another 4 weeks to continue looking after the station.
And so Quetzal will be back in 2 or 3 days.
That is what I said, yes.
But I have a question right away, so that I do not forget what I was just supposed to ask. Yesterday evening at the General Assembly, the question arose. However, we would like to have this clarified by the committee, and we also think that this should be integrated into the statutes. So, if you can arrange for the committee to deal with it and we know what it should be, that would help us.
Well, that is not a problem.
Then I want to start our conversation with that. Time and again I am asked about the terms God, gods and angels because, for example, these terms are used in the name books, as they are also significant as certain evaluations, and I use them when writing any texts. This is precisely because they are synonymous with certain forms of feeling and emotions, and make them resonate. This is because human beings on earth have used God, gods and angels in their language since time immemorial for their feelings, explanations and many other emotional impressions in order to express or reinforce what moves them in terms of feelings, explanations, or emotional impressions. Suzanne, for example, wrote to me in this letter that she does not understand what you can read for yourself.
Yes, apparently it is necessary that some explanatory things be said about this. This also applies to various other things that the commit would like to be addressed openly and in an explanatory manner. But I want to bring that into the conversation later. For now, what you have raised regarding the question of God and gods is to be addressed first, to which you are to respond.
Yes, that is probably important, which is why I want to say that it just so happens that, for example, it is often said in the form such as my God when something is just like this or like that, and not otherwise. Or, for example, oh God when something happens. Or, for example, if God wills it when something is about to happen that cannot be counteracted. But there are also meanings such as the forms this is divine or divine, godlike, or she, he is like a goddess, god, or godlike, demigod, or demigoddess. However, Gott befohlen, or say Gott behütet, are also commonly used as a farewell greeting by human beings, although only rarely do human beings, with the exception of the strictly religious, believe in an imaginary, dear God. This is simply because the expressions are used out of habit, and therefore as a result of automatism, without any thought being given to them. It has nothing to do with stupendous ignorance either, but really only with habit, automatism, and the fact that the word absorbed in the course of life in the use of language, as well as also usually in written reproduction in the form, has something to do with the fact that the human being automatically associates and understands something specific in connection with hearing the respective word term. This is due to the unconscious thought reaction, which expresses itself automatically and practically in a flash in corresponding feelings, and these trigger corresponding actions and emotions, which in turn give rise to feelings that are based on what the words God, gods, or angels are supposed to do, although these have nothing to do with a religious belief in any form. This only arises in a wise way with regard to a corresponding idea of something beneficial, happiness, love, protection, and joyful feelings, etc. The words God, gods, and angels are used in this manner purely out of habit and automatism, or in such a manner, such as angelic, angel-like, etc., in order to convey or explain something to fellow human beings, for which the correspondingly suitable word terms are suitable. Every normal human being handles this in this manner without believing in God, gods, or angels, in contrast to religious believers, who can very well associate the use of the words God, gods, and angels with their faith. The term angel, which should also be explained, comes from the ancient Greek language and is derived from the term angelus, which translates into German as messenger. However, This has been reinterpreted by religionists to mean that angels are messengers of God and inspired, and that they are constantly gathered around God's throne. The angels are regarded by religious believers as guardians of good, also as protectors, guardian angels, and even princes. Now, human beings who do not believe in this nonsense habitually use the words God, gods, and angels without a thought in a religious sense, because they generally use the words in speech, as well as in writing, as if automatically, because they have learnt to do so in their dealings with fellow human beings. On the other hand, religious believers do this because they are used to it through their religious faith. However, it is also the case that the terms God, gods, or angels are used linguistically or in writing by religiously unbelieving human beings, because human beings understand something specific by them, such as an energy and power, a certain attitude, a certain behavior, a certain habitus, an emotion, etc., as I have already explicitly explained. But can you please explain from your point of view and your understanding why we use these terms, which do not exist in this manner in the Plejaren language, because you have other terms for them?
What you say is correct, and we do not have the terms God, gods, and angels in this German form in our languages, of course. But of course they have been given since we came here to Earth. Consequently, our early ancestors created word concepts that we have used in our language ever since, in all our languages equally. Thus, the earthly term God is familiar to us as Geha, and gods as Geharu, and angels as Anges. However, since time immemorial, these terms have been accompanied by the explanation that they are artificial words that refer to fantasized, non-existent, that is to say, imaginary entities, which are erroneously and incorrectly referred to as the creation of all existence.
Creation of all existence. Surely this is referring to the creation, I assume?
Through my research, I found very old stone carving figures with strange signs that were recognized by our experts to be 320,000 years old. And these figures testified to the fact that quite obviously there were human beings on Earth worshiping things even then. I found the earliest names of higher beings during returns to ancient times when I heard the word Olan invoked by a Nordic ethnic group at a meeting of a group. Since ancient times, I have not found anything that has been said or described in such a manner that would have indicated that the terms God, gods, and angels were to be understood in a wise manner as the creation, or in the case of alleged angels, etc., as creation-related beings. Equally, you also only use these terms in a wise way to make Earth's humanity understand what is to be explained and understood. The terms God, gods, and angels are above all faith-based words of particular unworthiness, which I describe as stale, and which are based on the fact that they refer to earlier human beings who presumed to be the creators of all things and thus also of heaven and earth. According to my research, it was a long time ago that human beings who claim to be so-called gods apparently rose up, indoctrinating and lying in a wise way and misleading Earth's humanity. Consequently, the terms God, gods, and angels were probably created in this manner in very ancient times, but in the old language as Olan, which in my opinion was conceived as all beings, or something similar, and meant the same as gods in multiplication. That is to say, according to today's understanding, the terms God and gods came into being. But I cannot say that this was really the case, because it is only one possibility of how it could have been. But to verify this exactly would take a lot of time, which I do not have at my disposal.
That should actually clear up the whole of this.
That is correct. But if I now use the word terms God, gods, and angels, it is only because we are talking about them in context, just as you yourself only use these terms when you are explaining something. The reason why we also use these terms God, gods or angels in our conversations is because Earth's humanity imagines these words to mean what human beings mistakenly imagine to be higher values of love, blessing, loyalty, mentality, and happiness. However, since time immemorial, this has only corresponded to unvalues indoctrinated into Earth humans, which were deliberately invented in order to create a delusion of dependence and fear, whereby a slavish domination and control has emerged and dominates human beings, who do not perceive this in the delusion of faith, and consequently do not realize that they are being lied to and deceived with irregularities. As a result, delusional fantasies and illusions are commonplace among the majority of Earth's humanity, as are conscious and deceitful and purposeful lies and deceptions, but also conscious deception. As I have learnt from the history of earthly religions, God, gods, and angels are word concepts that were created early on through an assumption and a resulting belief. Basically, the terms were created through misinterpretation, which fundamentally corresponds to falsification, as is also the case with all religious books, based on the fact that certain human beings were highly revered because they
could eat more than bread, as we say. This says that human beings can do more than the usual things that human beings are capable of doing, and are therefore not only highly valued, but also regarded and revered as something special. Even in early times, early human beings observed and saw things, animals, or other things that they could not explain, and therefore wrongly recognized them as higher beings. These were then labeled much later with the word terms God, gods, and angels, although the origin of this was very early, and it is probably not possible to fathom which terms or word concepts were used for this.
That is right again.
Because it is the truth, but it will not be heard by the majority of humanity until far into the future, and this will continue to cause catastrophes, and also cost many human lives through the fault of human beings. But the warnings about this simply remain unheard, as I have already said, and so it would also be pointless for me to go public with this and shout loudly about what the future holds. Doing something personally in that wise is not in my character anyway.
You are also saying what will be. Besides, it would also not be good for you to go public personally. Just as you decided as a young boy never to do so, but to quietly spread the teaching of the truth, teaching of the creation energy, teaching of the life, that alone is correct and good. In this manner you can also avoid releasing any knowledge that is currently still to be kept secret.
I also have no intention of going public. I am not interested in that in any wise, because I am not a publicity-hungry film star, or otherwise keen to be something special, or otherwise big in public. Suffice it to say that I have had to work 3 times or so for film work, Japan, USA, and Mexico, and a few times for an interview for the German section. All because you wanted me to and thought it was necessary to make it known that you are here endeavoring to ensure that the truth finally penetrates and peace is established among the peoples of the earth. You even tried to reach 3 specific governments through me in order to present your advice on global peace through me. Everything was supposed to be such that you did not want to come into any wise contact with the foreigners, so that I would only operate as an intermediary, and it would be known that you, Pliaran, were behind everything. But those responsible in the governments of America, to whom we first wrote, Wendell, Lee and I, yes, it was America, of course, found it necessary to make stupid and also power-hungry demands, which you could not accept, and therefore withdrew your endeavors before it could even come to the point of establishing a connection. Consequently, the 2 other governments were not contacted, namely and A, because the same would have happened at that time, whereas with everything would have been ridiculed because the truth is not accepted, and the intellect is lacking to recognize it. Moreover, this is because the majority of those at the top of the governments consider themselves to be the ultimate above the population, and only judge and see them as stupid and crazy and as uneducated idiots anyway, as their Pappenheimer also do.
Unfortunately. Again, you are correct in your judgment of the state of affairs. But if America had not reacted in such a demanding, selfish, and domineering manner, a great deal could have been done to bring peace to the peoples of Earth. But due to the insolence and megalomania, as well as the sense of world domination of the Americans in charge, everything went down the drain, and everything was carried on in the old style, which means that wars such as those in Ukraine, the Middle East, and soon also in Yemen, bringing death, suffering, and destruction, continued. Unfortunately, this could not be prevented, and our attempt via you to spread words of conciliation failed. And again, it was hegemonic America that had failed, and will also gain allies in the future in order to extend its world domination and acts of war further and further, as will soon begin in Yemen, which will follow as the next target, because America presumes to act as the world police, so to speak, aggressively warlike, as the danger also threatens in the Far East. It is probably not necessary to explain this in more detail. What I do want to point out explicitly now, however, is that a FIGU channel is to be launched today, DEE.
I have already drawn Michael's attention to that, because he's doing this work.
The important thing here, however, as I think, and it is probably necessary, is that everything is done and publicized in the name of the FIGU Association. It should also be explicitly mentioned that we have nothing whatsoever to do with foreigners and their UFOs, and that we keep strictly away from them and do not allow them to locate us in any manner. It is also important to mention that we do not come from a planet in this cosmos, but that our homeworld era is in the cosmos of the differently dimensioned Ankar universe, which as such belongs to the same creation, comprising 7 universes of different dimensions. However, as far as the foreigners with their highly developed technology and their flying apparatus are concerned, as I have mentioned, and which are referred to as UFOs here on Earth and have been observed since time immemorial, but whose overall highly developed technology from an earthly point of view is very far inferior to ours, we keep our distance from them and therefore have nothing to do with them. The foreigners are not able to recognize us visibly or audibly, nor also in any technical apparatus radar-wise, etc., that they have not yet developed. They are also unable to locate us or otherwise detect our presence, as are the Earth's military forces, who are so far behind the still very primitive earthly technology that they cannot even recognize the true achievements of the inventions that have been produced since the middle of the century before last. This, just as the technology of the foreigners, which seems very futuristic to Earth humans, is also far behind ours, and consequently they are also unable to locate us. Not to mention the fact that their technology, which is far inferior to ours, also makes them incapable of penetrating into one of the dimensional structures of the 7 universes of our creation, and therefore certainly not into a dimension of a foreign creation. This is because they lack the knowledge of the necessary synchronization of the dimensions of the various universes that would enable them to change to another universe. It is also known to us that they have no knowledge of the fact that countless creations exist in the infinite of absolute nihilo, just as we know that they have no knowledge of the fact that there are 7-fold and different sizes and levels of development of absolute forms. Our ancestors already orientated themselves about this in ancient times, and consequently, this caused our ancestors to exercise caution and restraint very early on, which we also continue to do in the same manner. We Plearan and all members of the Federation are very careful to ensure that no foreigners from this Dern universe can enter our Ankar universe, from whom nothing good can possibly be expected. We Plearan and the entire number of the Federation are completely and utterly peaceful, so we do not want any belligerent elements to invade our Ankar universe. However, We do not know how far the foreigners, whom we therefore avoid for safety reasons, in this universe we call Dern, are able to penetrate into the dimensions of the past and the future, and therefore also manipulate them. All that is known to us in this respect, possibly to be feared and also the unknown, therefore prompts us to maintain contact and communication with you in such a manner that the whole thing is always and in every case shifted in time and place in such a manner that our presence together with you cannot be grasped by the foreigners. However, we have also secured this with regard to earthly attempts at possible underhand shadowing in such a manner that even electronic devices cannot make any kind of recordings. This is also the case when we move around the center or its grounds, as well as when we are looking for you in the buildings, for example, which is detected by the persons living there under certain circumstances, but the foreigners are still unable to find us out. It is now to be explained that we have also taken precautions, also on behalf of the committee, that after your departure, all data of your photographs and film recordings with my daughter Simya, say from the past, were removed and replaced by those forgeries that were released 9 years ago, with the futuristic technology fed to them, not by us. Therefore, if in the distant future it will be possible to penetrate back into the past, then only that which has already been released as a forgery will be detectable.
I do not understand that.
The films and photos that you were able to make in collaboration with my daughter Simya Se were maliciously falsified and manipulated into the past, and the effective was erased in such a manner that the forgery as a whole will be reproduced in perfection as if it were real if a search is possibly carried out in the future.
Despite your explanation, I do not understand what you are saying.
This is about
This is still in the future for the human beings of Earth, but what could be done about it now? Because but about this it is necessary for my understanding that you explain everything about it in more detail.
I can do that, but you must not.
I understand. Silence is the order of the day. Good, so be it.
The whole thing goes much further than you think. You are aware that falsifiers of both sexes take a lot of interesting information from our conversation reports, which you retrieve and also record in writing in order to then falsely rewrite it and falsely claim it as their own knowledge. In this regard, I have noticed that even well-known personalities are not afraid to do this and do it.
That does not bother me, which is why I also do not worry about it. So many human beings on Earth are stealing, falsifying, fantasizing, twisting and lying, and also insulting the effective truth as lies and deceit, that the rinds are cracking. When I think that ever since the art of writing has existed, religious books full of fantasized lies and deceptions have been written, which have led to the religious mania of countless believers, as well as to religious hatred, religious fanaticism, and since time immemorial, to religious wars, mass suicides by sectarian groups, as well as to religious persecution and religious genocides, etc., as in the World War by Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. As in the World War of Adolf Hitler and co., then I doubt that the Earthling can call anything like reason his own. The falsification of the truth, as well as the falsification of books and writings of all kinds, and also of paintings, objects, and goods of all kinds, have been common practice among Earthlings since time immemorial. It is therefore also in no wise surprising that our contact reports or parts of them are stolen, falsified, and misused, but are in turn denounced as lies and frauds, swindles, and fantasies. Such evil and dirty machinations are unfortunately inherent in the system worldwide, that is to say, an ingrained system of many Earthlings, and attract characters who simply want to be known and big, and also want to rake in millions of dollars, francs or euros, etc. The speed with which such lies, frauds, and forgeries, etc. are spread increases more and more as the overpopulation becomes larger and more extensive. The mere fear of such counterfeiting elements that others will beat them to it with the same counterfeits and therefore be strong competition, over which they have no control, drives them to forgery, lies, and fraud. This is proven, for example, by those elements who claim that they are in contact with you, or those who claim that they are on a first-name basis with foreigners and are allowed to fly in their UFOs, etc., etc. And it more than often happens in this wise that these lies, frauds, and fantasies are adopted unchecked and disseminated to the public, whereby all the liars, frauds, forgers, and fantasists can not only consolidate their mendacious position with false evidence, but inevitably also advance to become seemingly chosen star contactees, who also produce and disseminate esoteric and strictly sectarian promises of salvation.
This also corresponds to what is actually important to mention. However, would be that in order to preserve the facts and truth about the events, and in the course of the years of your contact with us, everything should be recorded in writing by the persons concerned and recorded in this manner, and what these and those members have experienced with you. Although some of this is contained in the conversation reports, it would be important for the entire memory content that the individual episodes of the events that took place around you are recorded in a separate written work, whereby an explicitly relevant heading could indicate what the recordings are about. Since,
Excuse me, by heading, you probably mean title, that is to say book title, right?
yes,
That is what I thought, and I also understood it that way. But how is it possible that such a book should be written? The fact is that all but a few of the witnesses have already died. Here on Earth, human beings do not usually reach Methuselah's age, as is the case with you, Playaran.
that is correct, but the few, as you say, could still bear witness to what others have witnessed.
I suppose that is so, but who is to write such a book?
That would be in the interest of those persons who think themselves predestined to do so. It is also not absolutely necessary that it corresponds to a book, because a work of association would also suffice.
I suppose you mean a brochure, that is to say a flap work or something?
That is what I thought, yes.
Aha, that is perhaps possible. Something like that could perhaps be compiled from the contact reports and from the stories of the still few witnesses, if someone could be found to do this work. It could be anyone, also someone who is not a core group member.
That would be conceivable, but it would be good if it was a member.
Let us see. Maybe it will turn out that someone from the core group is really interested. But sponge about it, because I am still interested in the fact that, as we have talked about before, the escaped rebels who came from your Ankar universe to our Dern universe, despite their rebelliousness, always behaved in such a manner that they never got involved with any foreigners who had highly developed technology compared to the Earthlings, and who might have had the opportunity to seize the rebels' technology. However, over the many millennia, they remained among themselves and unrecognized by the foreigners, as they did by the Earth's humanity. Why did it happen like this?
To ensure their own protection, all the factions of the fugitives adhered to what was decided earlier for security reasons.
Good, that is clear. But I do not think it is very clever of you to say what you said earlier so openly now. Do you not think this should continue to be kept quiet, and I should simply put dots when I retrieve and transcribe the conversation?
No, because I am mandated by the committee, as I mentioned before, to now speak openly about this and give the effective facts, because you are, just earthly speaking, now. So it is coming now.
But I will put dots when I retrieve and write it down. Besides, everything ends eventually. But I wonder whether what you have explained is actually any good, even if it is desired by the committee, as well as whether it is not better if I do not do it at all when recalling the conversation.
No, because the committee has decided so. The facts should now be stated openly, because
So be it then.
it really is meant to be, and I think it is also really important now, which is why I started openly pointing out months ago that we have nothing to do with the foreigners and their flying apparatus.
But you did not mention anything about the committee deeming this necessary. Really? You did not say anything?
Excuse me, then I actually did not say that?
Effectively, no.
Then I forgot to say it. That is unfortunate.
Never mind, that is what happens.
It is still unfortunate, and I did not want to hide anything from you.
It is good, do not blame yourself. As we say, it happens in the best of families. Besides, we are both at an age where we can forget things, and will not be held against us.
That is indeed the case, and it happens without meaning to. And what I have to say is that our latest investigations into the state of the Earth's atmosphere have shown that it has become very precarious, which has already led to inevitable deaths among human beings, animals, creatures, and other living beings due to respiratory failure. The earthly atmosphere is so poisoned as a result of chemical gas poisons of all kinds that all life forms are actually impaired in their breathing. From human beings to animals, creatures, and all life forms in general, to plants of all genera and species, right down to the lowest forms. You should not only retrieve this and write it down, but make it known worldwide, because the facts as to why this is happening are being completely concealed from all peoples.
Yes, you are right. But now something else. Many Earthlings of both sexes fall victim to dementia and then Alzheimer's disease. Svath told me that this very often occurs because self-thinking atrophies, which happens as a result of illusory thinking that occurs as a result of a belief. This belief, as he said, can be religious or also secular, but in either case it causes the brain tissue to atrophy and somehow become calcified and unstable, causing circulatory problems. And if I remember Svath's explanation correctly, he said that either way, the belief damages the brain to such an extent that it becomes completely incapable of normal, healthy, and independent thought, and can only indulge in illusory thinking that is detached from reality. This eventually comes to an unstoppable stupefaction of old age, as he explained, which I remember well.
I do not really need to explain anything more about that, because what you said corresponds to what actually is. This is by and large because there are still the natural forms of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. But these are rare, and in these forms the stability of the brain fails, and these forms can arise as a result of illness or accident.
What might be left to explain, which as a doctor you could probably do better than me, is what the difference is between dementia and Alzheimer's. For my part, I only know that in Alzheimer's disease, a loss of nerve cells severely affects the brain tissue, resulting in some processes and plaques, but dementia probably occurs first, which also causes damage to the brain as a result of circulatory disorders. But I cannot remember exactly what Svath explained. I would also like to say that my memory has also deteriorated, because since then, when I suffered the stroke, I have had trouble remembering people's names or anything else.
That is understandable.
Which might worry me, though.
Events of this kind can only be changed, if at all, by your own efforts, but you have taken them upon yourself and achieved more than is normally achieved by many human beings who are affected by a stroke. Happenings of this kind are also known to us and cannot be avoided at any conceivable age.
I know that, which Svath also explained when we were talking about these things once, because someone asked me about it, in whose family something like that occurred.
What I want to explain in addition, dementia and Alzheimer's disease have absolutely nothing to do with forgetfulness regarding a brain stroke, just as, on the contrary, a religious or secular belief very often causes dementia and consequently also Alzheimer's disease and thereby triggers it, because the belief prevents the very own thinking and thereby damages the brain activity.
But that will probably be disputed, especially by religious experts and other believers who are addicted to delusional thinking. But the fact that a belief, religious or secular, very often leads to dementia and Alzheimer's is something the Earthling does not want to understand. And your father Svath already explained that to me. He said that faith in particular, and therefore the illusory thinking of human beings, can lead to dementia and also to Alzheimer's, but also the lack of vitamins, minerals, and trace elements, and so on.
Unfortunately, that really is the case. That belief, if practiced for many years, leads to dementia and Alzheimer's disease. But there are also other factors, mainly chemical environmental toxins, obesity, lack of exercise, and high blood pressure. Also too much sweetness in terms of snacking and edibles, but also instability and inevitably related depression, lack of vitamins, minerals, as well as trace elements, as you correctly said, which are increasingly lacking in food in the coming times, as well as far too high levels of alpha-mech, leading to dementia and consequently also to Alzheimer's.
Can you name the most important of the vitamins and minerals and trace elements for once, as well as also explain what alpha-mech means, because Earthlings probably do not know that. As far as I know, if I remember correctly, as Svath explained to me, this is an amino acid that is so called and is part of the vitamin B series. But I cannot remember all his explanations exactly.
Your memory is correct, though. It is vitamins B6, folic acid, and B12, which is what you call sulfur-containing amino acid homocysteine.
Whereby this has a negative effect on the organism if the value in the body gets too high, Svath said.
Correct, but as far as vitamins, minerals, and trace elements are concerned, these nutrients are important for the entire body and its organism, which needs them as you know them under the following names: vitamins A, B1, B2, B6, B12, C ascorbic acid, D, E, K. Fiber, proteins, fats, minerals, carbohydrates, trace elements, silicon, and water are very important. Important are astaxanthin, boron, biotin, schonfroten, chloride, chromium, coenzyme Q10, iron, folic acid, glycine, glucosamine, iodine, potassium, copper, calcium, turmeric, lysine, L-methionine, magnesium, molybdenum, manganese, and also niacin, sodium, evening primrose oil, omega-3 fatty acids, pantothenic acid, phosphatidylserine, sulfur, selenium.
Thank you. That is enough. But then I want to address again what has recently come up through a conversation with Michael, namely that your Ankar universe does not simply exist in a different dimension in our Dern universe, but is a completely different universe in the overall space of the 7 comprehensive universes of our creation. So this has nothing to do with the fact that our universe has its own countless dimensions of the past as well as the future in addition to the present, as is the case with all 7 universes of creation.
That is probably correct. But before this will be understood by those scientists who will deal with this matter in the correct wise, it will, however, still take a very long time and will only be in the distant future. So when foreigners make their presence felt, even from the distant future, they will also have nothing to do with us because we will keep our distance from them, as you know. In addition, which is a committee decision, we will withdraw from this Dern universe for good when you have gone your way. If you are asked about it in more detail, and there is also no real need for a necessary knowledge and disclosure and a pertinent enlightening answer in this regard, you should not talk about it.
But there is the question, what is it like regarding the year 3999 if...
To talk about it is not good, but it may be said that in this respect everything remains as it was explained and will come to pass.
So that remains good then. But as for what you said, I have been keeping quiet about it all my life, and about everything Svath told me to keep quiet about. However, it is sometimes difficult to simply remain silent, especially when something happens that is already known in advance as a result, and that could have been avoided at the outset if we had listened to what was explained and said as a warning and acted logically, rationally, and sensibly. Unfortunately, it also continues to happen in this wise, which is the result of the wrong manner of acting if the wrong manner of acting is continued. In addition, I experienced that perhaps, if it was a lot, the advice given was followed once or twice, but then dropped, which then resulted in the evil that was clearly foreseeable and warned against. This was also the case in Southwest Africa about 120 years ago. For example, where Germany had been a colonial power since the 1880s, and Svath warned Kaiser Wilhelm II against continuing to harass the locals and inciting the various ethnic groups against each other. At that time, the German settlers were there, stealing more and more land and being evil racists beyond compare. Just like the Nazis against the Jews, this under the patronage of the Austrian Adolf Hitler. Why the fickle people of Germany submitted to this foreign man at all, as they have been doing the same to America since 1945, remains a complete mystery to me. The neo-Nazis in America and all over the world are just as deceitful today, as is also that part of the German government that falsely, hypocritically, and fraudulently outed itself as good friends of Jews in Israel, but in reality is exactly the opposite. This is despite the fact that they are traveling to Israel by plane at the taxpayers', that is to say the people's expense, and hypocritically pretending to be good friends, especially with Netanyahu, whose delusions of ambition Bermuda has fathomed and established that this man is obsessed with power, delusional, and absolutely unscrupulous, and willing to walk over dead bodies on a massive scale. And the hatred of Jews and foreigners in Germany has not just flared up again recently, but started again some time ago and is on the rise again. The tirades of hatred in this regard will increasingly come to light in open demonstrations and cause unpleasantness. The reason for what is coming will also be because the neo-Nazis see it as the fault of the disunited German government supplying weapons and money to Zelensky, who as a Jew goes begging in all kinds of countries worldwide for weapons, ammunition, other war material and money, which the governments of various countries actually give him, as usual without the consent of the people concerned, because they are not asked at all. As I know, Zelensky is also coming to Switzerland in the near future, and of course he will also be begging behind the scenes, which of course will not be said publicly, but will effectively be so, and will influence certain minds when meeting with him. Bermuda told me that I should not say anything about it, because...
That is also correct.
And to that I want to emphasize and say the following explicitly. When I say something, it never has anything to do with a view, opinion, or partiality on my part, because I only ever state existing facts, and always as I have seen them personally, as I am told something, as I hear it with my own ears, or as I read something. I do not presume to express a personal view, opinion, or even bias, so I remain completely neutral in everything I say and explain. But all human beings who know me personally really know this, which is why I am taking the liberty of reading you the words of Stefan Hanekamp, which he wrote, without my involvement, without any prompting on my part, etc., to you. So listen to what he writes.
About the nonpartisanship of Billy, Eduard Albert Meyer, Stefan Hanekamp, Austria.
Many people who know Billy from the contact reports know that he always speaks very objectively about a matter and never lets his personal sensitivities get in the way of his judgment of a matter, but always speaks the truth without beating about the bush. However, the truth he speaks is very often not positive, but this is not because he only sees the negative, but because it is his task to bring the teaching of the truth, teaching of the creation energy, teaching of the life, which in turn also entails naming the ills of this earthly world. Naturally, naming the negative facts and truths does not trigger a feeling of well-being, but often incorrectly leads to recognizing a bias in Billy's statements, insofar as his negative statements are projected onto one's own personality or onto a person who is sympathetic to oneself and now appears in a worse light. So what Billy says is seen as an attack and bias, although objectively speaking, it is nothing more and nothing less than just the truth. Billy's non-partisanship applies to states, governments, parties, organizations, institutions and groups of all kinds, but also to individuals. Some attentive readers of the contact reports will have noticed, for example, that Billy has said good and bad things about the two former US presidents Donald Trump and Barack Obama. Of course, saying good and bad things about one and the same person has nothing to do with fickleness, but simply with the fact that all human beings more or less do something constructively good or destructively bad in their actions and deeds. And since Billy does not do things by halves, it goes without saying that he is also impartial towards individuals within the Phi Gu Association. If someone is of the opinion that they can gain Billy's favor in any matter by doing this or that for Phi Gu, and thereby hoping to achieve a better position or preferential treatment within Phi Gu, then this is an absolute impossibility. Favoritism, partisanship, but also discrimination against individual persons, is categorically out of the question in Phi Gu. Anyone who knows Billy personally knows that he himself lives his non-partisanship. Although his non-partisanship is very often recognizable in the contact reports alone, and consequently evidence of this can also often be found there. If you know Billy personally, you soon realize that he gives every Phi Gu member the same respect and attention. It does not matter whether a Phi Gu member has been a member for 10, 20, 30 or 40 years, or has only been at the Phi Gu Center for a year, or even for the first time. It also does not matter whether a Phi Gu member is very actively involved in the mission or not. Although Billy is pleased when Phi Gu members support his mission, or the mission of Phi Gu with this or that action, he never has expectations of Phi Gu members, and therefore also does not create any pressure of expectation or time pressure. He does say what should be done for the mission, but leaves the freedom to determine whether this is actually done or not, whether a variation of it is done, or even something completely different is done, an idea that he has not mentioned. Should individual members within the Phi Gu commit any wrongdoing, then the seriousness of the error is weighed solely on the basis of the wrongful act, and not on the basis of the specific person who acted incorrectly. When judging an action or deed, whether good or bad, Billy's focus is therefore always on the action itself, while the person associated with it as a human being does not enter into the judgment at all. This applies to Billy inside and outside the Phi Gu, that is to say, everywhere. Billy also makes no distinction as to which persons he is lenient towards. Should any actions of individual persons be to the detriment of Phi Gu or Billy himself, whether once or over decades, then the matter is simply water under the bridge, provided it no longer has any impact at present. He harbors no grudges or bad thoughts towards unpleasant situations that have flowed into the past, because such an approach has no evolutionary value and is therefore superfluous. Billy exemplifies non-partisanship towards all human beings, meaning that all human beings are of equal value to him as human beings. Non-partisanship sharpens the view of objective reality and makes it possible to recognize true and false statements made by one and the same person. Non-partisanship stands in contrast to a fan or fanatic who has a strong partisanship towards an organization or person, especially towards political parties, sports teams, actors or singers. Consequently, they are praised to the heavens, while all those who have anything critical to say are punished with unpleasant thoughts. The typical personal party-related thinking of a supporter, fan or fanatic is, this political party, this team, this actor, this actress, this singer is great. The thinking of a partisan is, this statement from the political party was correct, wrong this time. This team's performance was good, bad this time. This actor's performance was good, bad this time. This musician's new song sounds good, moderate, bad this time. This human being's action, deed was good, bad this time.
Admirable observation and gift of observation and judgment from Stefan Hanekamp.
Yes, that is true, and I also thank him for that, as well as for what he wrote. However, this has absolutely nothing to do with self-praise. It is simply a description of a fact that corresponds to effectiveness and that I think is good. But now I have something else to say that I have deviated from, namely that something is being done over the heads of the people by those in power, which in principle should be decided by the people, and only they should vote on whether it should be done or not. And in such a vote, as in a vote in general, it must be clearly stated that in an effectively true democracy, only a truly absolute unanimity is valid for the acceptance or rejection of an election proposal, meaning that in the event of a tie, the ballot is invalid and must therefore be cancelled. This is in contrast to a partial democracy, where only a larger proportion of the votes, or a majority of more than 50%, is valid for a ballot, which, however, must be properly laid down in writing, and only then is it valid. But now the following. Similarly, the rulers of Germany are doing it over the heads of the citizenry by partisanly supplying weapons, ammunition, tanks and money to Zelensky in Ukraine, and this at the expense of that part of the German people who, as righteous people, have nothing to do with all this, and with racism and filthiness, and thus also want nothing to do with that part of the government that consists of neo-Nazis. And what happened around 120 years ago in German Southwest Africa, which is about half the size of Germany, and is now called Namibia, was nothing other than what Hitler and his henchmen did in the 1939–1945 World War, namely a Holocaust, that is to say a genocide, and also the incitement of the two tribes of the Herero and the Nama, who then waged a guerrilla war against the Germans. And what the ruling class and effective neo-Nazis in Germany are doing, with regard to everything else that is being decided over the heads of the people, really knocks the bottom out of the barrel. Just as I have said, the new WHO Pandemic Treaty, which is to be approved as international health regulations next May, is to be concealed and secretly imposed on all the peoples of all the countries of the world. As a result, the following rights to which human beings are entitled, for example, are to be curtailed or completely cancelled and rendered invalid. 1. The WHO will then henceforth decide what human beings are allowed to experience and discuss, this thereby suspending freedom of opinion. 2. All governments must fulfill all WHO requirements. The WHO will then determine which animals are to be vaccinated or killed, whereby pets of all genera and species may also be affected. 3. The WHO will in future control freedom of travel with health certificates. 4. The WHO will then be able to override human rights and also human dignity and their basic values at any time. These are just a few examples of what the whole WHO change plan is supposed to entail, which is being prepared in secret and threatens to be implemented if the people do not oppose it. It is all about the power of the WHO, but not about the health of human beings, animals and wildlife, etc., but effectively only about the expansion of the WHO's competences and might, which the governments and those in charge of the WHO want to enforce secretly. This is a foretaste of what is to come for human beings, but which will become much and much worse in the future through the stupid use, implementation and effectiveness of artificial intelligence, through which human beings will ultimately be bogged down and controlled in such a manner that they will completely and utterly lose their freedom and become nothing more than slaves to the government, the authorities, the security agencies, etc., and to artificial intelligence. This is the future music whose notes Svath and I have glimpsed in the future. And it will also be in other ways, and the WHO will probably also be involved in the background, that human beings will be so littered with rules, new regulations and laws, etc., that their freedom will be restricted to such an extent that they will no longer even be allowed, to put it bluntly, to step outside their own front door without official permission. This, just as human beings are to be deprived of the right to freely determine their own goods, valuables and money, whereby the start has already been made with the rules, regulations, and laws on money laundering, which are being used as an excuse to deprive people of the right to manage their own financial assets. This while they are to be exploited more and more with taxes and all kinds of levies, with food and also everyday consumer goods becoming so expensive that many human beings will find it so difficult to swallow that they will no longer know how to get in and out, will become impoverished, and will drive themselves out of existence. This will happen while those at the top, that is to say those in power, will spend the money collected, which is actually taken from the people by robbery, with full hands, so much so that debts will be incurred. Irresponsibly, much of the money siphoned off from the people is squandered on partisan war aid and other nonsense, without the people's permission, or also without even informing them. All this is already happening today without the people being able to decide on it, and it is already being done by various countries, that is to say their governments, without the people being informed. And it will happen in Europe in such a manner that the EU dictatorship will soon take steps in terms of regulations and laws to increasingly curb the flow of money of all peoples connected to it through lies and deceit, and to prevent them from freely using their money, for which Switzerland, following the old example of the bailiffs, will also lend a hand, as it is already doing the groundwork through its bank management machinations. However, such events and many others are concealed from the public, even by the authorities, because the people are not allowed to know what the top echelons of government are doing, so they are simply presented with a fait accompli of what has been decided by the authorities surreptitiously, and without the will of the people, and is being implemented from now on, without the people being able to do anything about it. And this is the case in all countries of the world, without exception. And what is even worse is that if anyone among the people dares to expose and publicize the truth about this or that by the authorities or their agencies and security forces, then the human being or whole groups of human beings are bullied, threatened, subjected to legal action, or simply bumped off by the higher-ups or their agencies. The truth is not in demand, and anyone who speaks and spreads it openly is no longer sure of their reputation or even their life, because those who tell the truth are simply put out of the way without pardon. This also happens to those human beings who stand up for the truth about overpopulation, who tell the truth against all the claims of those who rely on the false lies of the world population census based on fraud, and allow themselves to be misled by it. It is also lied that only about 50,000 or 54,000 genera and species of animals, creatures, other self-propelled life forms and small and large plants die out every year, but that there are about 60,000 per year is, perhaps erroneously, not said. It is also not said that overpopulation is entirely to blame for this, because nature is being robbed of its land and mountain areas and built up with houses, apartment blocks, roads, sports grounds, and factories, etc. Forests are also being cleared and deforested. Forests are also being cleared and robbed, namely around 22,000 hectares per year, which I calculate to be 220 million square meters. Through the fault of human beings, this not only destroys the habitats of wildlife, but also wipes out many genera and species of wild animals, wild creatures, and other self-perpetuating life forms, as well as the smallest and largest plants. And human beings are also so irresponsible that they are also drastically reducing wildlife through hunting. Not only are many wolves killed, which logically prey on sheep and goats, which are kept in oversized herds due to the demand for meat as a result of ever-increasing overpopulation, and are also driven across the countryside and meadows, but also roe deer, stags, chamois and lynx, badgers, wild sows, hares, marmots, weasels, raccoon dogs, raccoons, wild birds and foxes, etc. All this is done just for the sake of it. And all this is only done for the sake of the hobby of being able to shoot and kill living creatures, but not, as is mendaciously claimed, to regulate the game population, but to adapt it to the overpopulation, which began to increase in 1701, and has rapidly and violently exceeded the limits of what the Earth is capable of supporting, feeding, and enduring. By 1945 at the latest, after Hitler's World War, there should have been a worldwide and strictly controlled stop to births in order to reduce the overpopulation of 2.55 billion back to the normal level of around 500 million, which is the maximum that can and may be calculated for planet Earth in terms of its size, and the fertile land for the cultivation of natural food for Earth's humanity. In addition to legally permitted hobby hunting in civilized countries, but also in foreign and underdeveloped countries, just shooting and killing, there is also unscrupulous poaching to exterminate wild animals of all genera and species. This happens in all so-called civilized countries, especially with regard to the shooting of deer, stags, chamois, wild sows and marmots, etc. While in Africa and other countries predatory game, as well as big game and pangolins, etc. are shot, snakes caught and other living creatures killed in order to hawk parts of them as trophies or for medicinal purposes, etc., or to smuggle and sell them in civilized countries.
Unfortunately, everything is indeed as you said.
Yes, and unfortunately I am just talking into the wind, because there will be precious few human beings who will think about what I am addressing with my words, and even fewer who will take it all in and change for the better.
Yes, that will be the case, as it always is when someone speaks the truth. However, it is very important that it is finally spoken openly, clearly and plainly, and that what is necessary is said, and the effective truth is made known, namely what is real and what is being hidden and concealed from the public by those responsible. It is absolutely incomprehensible to me and to our peoples that state leaders on Earth can secretly do as they please without the respective populations of the states concerned being informed about this, and without them authorizing and allowing it.
Unfortunately, there is not a single country here on Earth that is actually and truly capable of real democracy, meaning that only the entire people of a country would decide everything, and therefore no secret behavior by those in power would be possible. Here in Switzerland, too, there is only a partial democracy, because here, too, the fair government can do all sorts of things behind the backs of the people, of which they are unaware and excluded.
But that has nothing to do with democracy.
Yes, I know that. Moreover, coming back to what we were talking about before, I will say that was also because you wanted me to. I spoke together with our FIGU members in front of more than 820 people in the Bernhard Theater in Zurich. I then gave a talk at the Hofbräu House in Munich, where there were just over 1,000 people, and then in Vienna, in front of just over 200 persons at the Café Westend. But that was all because you wanted me to, because otherwise I would never have done it. It was also the same in Thun, where I had to speak in front of students. Even when Anna and Karl Veit, Ilse von Jacobi and Erich von Däniken came to see me in Hinwil, and I answered their questions, as I also did with other greats, such as the politicians, and from Germany, with whom I had close contact over the years, and who came to me for advice, and later also with Guido at the center, because he often came here. It was only because you agreed when these people asked me if I would receive them. The older gentleman, Dr. Fraude from Zurich, and Dr. from also came and simply turned up at the center without being asked, and kept coming back for years. 2 of them then died, Dr. Fraude and Prof.
But there were still the 2 gentlemen from Born. And I, as well as A, who often telephoned you, as well as and I, whose names I have also not forgotten. Also, that is in Turbenthal, as well as the from you should also not forget the 4 military personnel who—
Yes, but I was asked by all of them never to mention their names and not to say anything about the fact that they were in contact with me, and also not when they died, so as not to embarrass their families. In the meantime, and also and have gone their way of the ephemeral. Nevertheless, I am really sticking to not mentioning their names, because I promised them I would. I also stick to not saying anything about what and where they work, or where and what the deceased worked, so it would be pointless if someone were to ask me about it.
Yes, of course, and I know you can keep quiet. My father Svath explicitly noted this in his annals, along with many other of your behaviors, which my father was very surprised about, although he did not teach or instruct you in these things, but that you worked them out independently within yourself. For example, you explicitly treated every human being as such and also saw, honored, appreciated, and treated everyone as such, even when they called you foul names and hit you. As my father Svath recorded in his annals, you always and without exception judged only the good or bad actions of human beings, but never condemned a human being as such. He also noted that you only judged them, the human beings, in terms of their character, but never condemned them.
After all, it would not have been correct. And I also think that today, namely that the human being as such is vilified or otherwise maligned when he acts wrongly or wickedly, that is not correct. Either way, he or she is and remains a human being, and therefore he or she should also be treated as a human being, even if he or she commits a criminal offense and a punishment is imposed on him or her. However, this should always be such that it does not harm human beings as such, and also not their body and organism. That is to say, corporal punishment, torture, or the death penalty should never be used. If this is done, then those who demand and carry out corporal punishment or torture are guilty in this respect, just as those who demand the death penalty are also guilty of murder, as are those who carry it out. Every human being's life should be absolutely inviolable, just like every life in general. Torture and the death penalty were invented in ancient times, contrary to all truth, through religious lies, as a result of revenge, greed, and thirst for wealth, etc., created and mendaciously attributed to an imaginary god who allegedly demanded them. And this was fabricated in all religions and sects in the same manner, and elevated to religious laws, which very quickly also found their way into purely secular laws, and became the unquestioning imposition and exercise of the death penalty. And this is still practiced criminally today against all laws of life in various states, both religious and secular, in Christian states as well as in Islamic states and countries of other faiths. Wars and terror were also fantasized in the same religious wise, with Protestants and Catholics, Christians, killing each other, as here in Switzerland, for example, in the two Capellar Wars around 1530, under the leadership of Zurich and the pastor from Glarus, the reformer Ulrich, that is to say Huldrych Zwingli, who lost his life in the Second War. He was not only captured by his Catholic opponents, but branded a heretic, stabbed, quartered, and then burnt. As far as I know, these wars, which are referred to as battles in Switzerland, were the first in Europe. But before that, around 100 years earlier, religious wars had actually already taken place in Germany, the Hussite Wars.
I can only agree with you on this, but now I would like to discuss the following with you regarding...
You can, of course, but you should not forget that you still want to explain to me what this is all about, for which it was said that this would be explained later.
Actually, I did not think about it anymore, but I will explain everything to you in detail.
Good, but here I have something else that I think is good, and I do not want to keep it from you. Look here, what religions do found on Facebook?
Someone really thought about the truth and visualized the result of their thinking.
That is what I also thought. But I think it is not only good and correct for Facebook to publish this, but also extremely remarkable and courageous.
That is so, I also think so. But now we should turn to the other thing that still needs to be discussed.
Of course,